we can at least ask whether or to what extent the policies of our times have contributed to these problems of our time. Looking ahead to the future, one of the things that we need to focus on are facts about results, not rhetoric about intentions. We need to look not at the noble preambles of legislation, but at the incentives created in that legislation. Very often, legislation intended to help the disadvantaged, in fact, pay people to stay disadvantaged.
That's a powerful insight that Thomas Sowell, the great economist that he is, speaks about. While I disagree with some of the things that he may stand with, most of his work that I've come across has been impeccable. And him breaking it down about how the politics of poverty actually keeps the poor poor, and those who advocate, i.e. the politicians who run on the campaign of making the rich pay, actually become wealthy themselves by playing the game and keeping the poor people as victims of the rich, while they are the intermediaries and they're getting wealthy off the back of that victim mentality that they have imposed on those who they say they represent. Allow him to continue.
Penalize them to the extent that they make an effort to rise from disadvantage. One of the problems in dealing with the politics of poverty and the programs for the disadvantaged in general, and blacks in particular, is that vast empires can be built on these programs. That these programs definitely prevent poverty among bureaucrats, economists, statisticians, and many others.
Now, you caught what he said. Vast empires can be built on these policies that these politicians are pushing for the poor. But instead of the poor being raised up out of poverty, the poor remain in poverty, and those who represent them, i.e. the Jasmine Crockett's, i.e. the Maxine Waters, i.e. the Cory Bookers, i.e. the Al Sharptons, and all these individuals have become well-to-do, meaning their base income, their wealth has increased exponentially, while those impoverished communities that they say they fight for remain impoverished and are actually getting worse. And the behavior that emanates out of those communities is only making that situation within the community that much worse. They continue to holler, the politicians, that it's about the Republicans, it's about race, it's about injustice, while at the same time, they do not hold their constituents accountable for the deplorable behavior that they are engaging in. Why? Because they are getting rich off keeping their constituents poor and dumb and emotional. And this is where the disconnect comes in. All we have to do is look at the numbers, look at the record, and the record speaks for itself. Those inner city communities who have been getting the politicians who have represented, who want to continue to get the handouts for those communities have continuously gotten worse, while the politicians who represent those communities come into office and have an uptick in their wealth, an uptick in their status. How can this be? This is because they are playing the game of politics and using the victimhood mentality and the victimhood ideology as a springboard for their wealth, while they keep the victims in their victimhood status, and they remain emotionally attached to the politicians because they believe that this politician is actually doing something for them, when in actuality the politician is gaming them. Allow him to continue.
I think that what this betrays is a sense, a sort of proprietary conception of blacks, somewhat at variance with the spirit of the 13th Amendment. I think that if insofar as we're going to enlist the intelligence, the desires, and the commitments of blacks themselves, we have to do so by offering more choice in more areas, to let them decide what is best for themselves and not to turn that job over to academics and government officials.
These government officials have misled the black community entirely. And this is why we have to step away from the emotions of politics and those individuals who push emotions instead of pushing facts and solutions to help us to change our situation. Going to bring AOC to the stage because she continues to push the ideology, the philosophy that it is socialism that is the best form of governance to bring people out of poverty. And she has demonized capitalism as being something that it isn't. The system of capitalism is not a system that is wicked. The individuals who may engage in wicked behavior in the name of capitalism, that is that individual, just as individuals engage in the wickedness of the things they do within the system of socialism, communism, etc. Capitalism is the best form of monetary economic structure for society as it has been displayed versus socialism and communism. While you have those things that occur within capitalism that causes or are indicated when it comes to poverty, etc., this is not because of capitalism. This is because of the individuals and the systems and the politicians and the corporate leaders who may engage in the behavior that is not associated with a capitalistic mindset, with a free market, but with the manipulation of that market. Those and these individuals are the issue. It is not capitalism in and of itself. It is the application of capitalism. There is no greater system to date that allows an individual that comes from poverty to be able to rise themselves up out of poverty other than capitalism. And who wants to be controlled? Who wants more government control over your ability to be able to create, produce unlimited amount of wealth or whatever it is that you desire? That is a personal prerogative. Those who are not benefiting from that, of course, some contributing factors may be to the greed of some individuals within a capitalist society, but it is not the end all be all. And yes, certain systems were in place that prevented individuals from becoming all they could be when it was legalized segregation, legalized discrimination, etc. But that is not the function of a capitalistic system in its purity. That is the function of individuals and institutions that came up under capitalism that use their bias and whatever racism and discrimination they had within them to impose these restrictions. It had nothing to do with capitalism. Capitalism is the best monetary system that we have to date. And any individual who wants to be free, who wants more autonomy of themselves, as I do, I embrace capitalism with its flaws and with its greatness. You have flaws and greatness in every system, but it is surely not of interest to me to have the government determining how much money I can make, determining what I can do more than they already are determining what I can do. Who wants to live like that? Not a free man and not a free thinking woman. Now let's allow AOC to put forth her misinformed discussion on capitalism.
It's an ideology of capital. It puts capital, the most important thing is the concentration of capital, and it means that we seek and prioritize profit and the accumulation of money above all else, and we seek it at any human and environmental cost.
That is not the basis of capitalism. That is the basis of an individual who is dealing with some type of pathology or some type of mindset that wants to be dominant over others. And you find this in socialism as well as in communism, in a dictatorship. You'll find these individuals in any system that exists, but those systems are controlled and dominant and wants to be at the top of all of humanity when it comes to controlling what those beneath them under the control of the governmental system will be faced with. She is absolutely off on her assessment. She is taking individual behaviors and applying that to a system. It is not the system, it is the individual that implements his or her version of that system within their life. Yes, is there greed, and individuals have used greed? Of course, but many individuals have used a great amount of compassion with the great wealth that they have accumulated as well in order to help others. When you want to make an equal outcome for everybody within a system, you are restricting imagination and you are actually working against the innovation that comes from an individual seeking, knowing that they can be all they can be with what their minds can imagine and they can bring forth. When you put a cap on that, you cap innovation and you cap the creature comforts that she obviously is benefiting from as well. Socialism, communism, they have not survived in and of themselves. And if you look at China, they're not really a communist regime when it comes to making money. They're communists in the fact that they control a system where they keep a stronghold on many of the things that those up under their governing system can do, but they are becoming extremely wealthy, those who rule it. And they do so by engaging in capitalism. Let's continue.
That is what that means. And to me, that ideology is not sustainable and cannot be redeemed.
Let me start with something I've said for years. People who think they can remake the world to suit their visions usually end up breaking it instead. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez's statement is a textbook example of that, a stew of buzzwords and moral posturing that collapses under the weight of facts and history. She's not describing capitalism. She's caricaturing it, and badly. Let's take this apart piece by piece because there's too much ignorance here to let it slide.
We're listening to the great Thomas Sowell. Allow him to continue.
First, she calls capitalism an ideology of capital that prioritizes profit above all else. That's a slogan, not an analysis. Capitalism isn't about worshiping money. It's about voluntary exchange. People trade goods, services, and ideas because both sides benefit, not because someone's hoarding a pile of gold. Wealth isn't concentrated like some cosmic injustice. It's created. Take Henry Ford. He didn't steal his fortune. He built cars millions could afford, revolutionizing transportation and employing thousands. Or look at Steve Jobs. Apple's innovations didn't concentrate wealth. They generated it, lifting living standards worldwide. The World Bank says global extreme poverty fell from 36% in 1990 to under 10% by 2019.
Capitalism is indeed the driving force behind the greatest innovations on the planet. And it is the creature comforts that many of us have benefited from, came from the fact that a capitalistic society allowed us to be imaginative and to bring forth that which we imagined. Have a beautiful day. Peace.